Hi, welcome back to the shop. You might remember these. These are the saw arbors we made in the last series of videos. These have a straight 12mm shank. This is a 8mm one. This is a 10mm arbor. But I also want to use that style of arbor with my staggered tooth cutters, and these have a 16mm bore. So I want to make arbors that with 16 and 13mm bore. But for these cutters take quite a lot of torque, and I don't want to clamp them in a collet. I'm going to make them with a Morse taper 2 shank, and already turned one of the Morse tapers, and I have raw material for a second one. And first of all, we will go to the lathe, set it up to taper turning, and then we will machine the Morse taper 2 taper on the end. Then we can flip it around, hold it in a Morse taper 2 sleeve in the lathe, and machine the arbor end where it holds the cutter. Okay, first of all we need a master taper that we can use to set our top slide. And for that purpose I'm using my Morse taper 2 test bar, which has a known good Morse taper 2 on it. And we will just clamp this carefully in the chuck. Make sure it's seated properly and clamp it lightly. No need to crank this down like crazy. We don't want to put marks into the cylindrical side of this thing. Now we bring in our indicator, and when we indicate the angle on a taper, it's important that the stylus of the dial test indicator is on center height, because when you run it up here you will get a slightly off angle. It needs to be pretty much on center height. And what I found out is that it's pretty much good enough if we eyeball the stylus against our live center on the lathe. But even before we set the angle, we may have to make sure that this runs true in the chuck, or otherwise we could introduce an error from that source. So let's bring the indicator up against the chuck, against the taper of the test bar, and spin it around. And as I already did the last one, it's not surprising that we get pretty much no run out, so this is good enough. Now we set our stylus to center height. And here is the live center in my tailstock, and here is the tip of the dial test indicator. And we're just eyeballing it to center height. Another way to do it would be using a normal dial indicator with a flat base. Then you can run across the front edge of the taper, and the center height would not be critical. So we have it on height, pretty much. Yes, and now we can run it across the tape. Okay, let's start to indicate. I semi-tightened the bolts of the compound slide so I can bump it around with the plastic hammer. I bring the dial test indicator in contact with the taper, and then I run the compound slide across it. And as you can see, the needle moved quite a bit, so we adjust it. I prefer to do this while I'm moving. Okay, we start again at 0 and we move out 0 and we're slightly, half a hundredth of a millimeter. We're slightly moving away from 0. Now I tighten the screws of the top slide a bit more so I don't move it accidentally when I crank the top slide. We're at 1. Still 1. Yeah, this is as good as it gets. So now we have our top slide at the right angle for the Morse taper 2, and we can take all this stuff away. Also get our test bar out of the spindle. Okay, now we need some material. These are the blanks I cut before. This is also the 42 chromoly with sulfur, which machines really nice and as tough as can be. And I need about this much overhang to turn the taper and finish it. So let's get a good grip on this. And I would prefer to turn a taper with a tapered attachment, but this lathe has none. Maybe I'll build one day or buy another lathe. But the top slide on this lathe is barely long enough to turn a Morse taper 2, so I'm kind of fine. I couldn't turn a Morse taper 3 or 4 with this machine. The Morse taper 2s always have at the end a short cylindrical portion, about 5 mm long and 14 mm in diameter. So we're going to turn this first. For the taper turning, we have to do this with the compound slide, of course, and this has no power feed, but we want a pretty good surface finish, so we don't have to do so much polishing work afterwards. So hand cranking, yeah, I could do it hand over hand, but it's pretty long taper and pretty much material to remove, so I'm using the handheld power feed sponsored by Makita. It's just a cordless drill with adapter for socket set, a universal joint and a deep socket that fits onto the hand wheel of my compound slide. That's my power feed. There are not many lathes out there with articulated compound feet. There are some that have a shaft with 2 universal joint that goes to the compound slide, and they have power feed on the compound, and that's quite neat, but not on my lathe. So let's set it up. Okay, and that's end of travel. And it has also quick return. There we go. It's a bit more convenient than hand clip. There we go. This is really not the worst finish. But we will polish that up anyway. And now for polishing the shank, I have 180 grit emery cloth here, 400 grit, and this is 130 micrometer 3M super finishing film. This will give a high luster, super nice finish. And 3M Imperial micro finishing film, aluminum oxide 3 mil, number 2621. Oh, 30 micro, sorry. I don't know where to buy this, where you can get it. I got this from a friend, and it's about 500 feet of that stuff. Nope, not giving anything away. We start with the 180 grit, and we back it off with in parallel so we don't round over the edges. And we're using some cutting oil. And I have, of course, the bed of the lathe covered with a rag. Just clean it, and it's already getting pretty good. And what's important now is to check for the taper fit, and I use a pen for this, a water-resistant pen, like a Sharpie for you Yanks. And I just draw a few lines on the outer diameter. Then I take a Morse taper 3 to 1 socket, which has a Morse taper 2 internal. Make sure it's clean, because machine tapers are, of course, super sensitive to dirt and nicks in the surface. Now we can drop it on, give it a quarter turn, and pull it off. And now we see where the taper is matching, and we get contact in the upper 2/3, so that's not too bad. That's really not bad. Not bad at all. I don't mind that. Now we will use the emery cloth to work more of this upper area. Our aim is to have this more or less contacting on the whole surface. It is a bit like scraping. You search for the high spot and then you work the high spots. After you work the high spot, you equalize the whole surface, and then you can redo your check. Okay, there we go. Take our Morse taper 2 socket, quarter turn, pull it off, and now it got a bit better. Okay, I worked the taper with the 180 and 400 grit emery cloth, and I got it to a good finish so far, and also to a pretty good fit. Let's do a test. Some red paint. Now we take a Morse taper extension. This is more reliable than the sleeve I had before. Slip it on, press it on, turn it slightly and release it. And we get pretty much contact all along the surface. And this should be good enough for a sliding saw arbor. And we can do another test. We get our arbor back on there, seated, and now we can check the runout on the end. Okay, I have the extension socket on the Morse taper, and down here we have the extended Morse taper. This is a Morse taper 3, but we can of course check the runout in 2 positions. And as this is quite a long distance up to this end, it's quite a reliable setup. So let's bring in the dial test indicator. Okay, I brought it up to 40. And that's about 1/100th of a millimeter. Not too bad. And if we bring it in to the closer end, also up to 40, we get a bit below 1/100th of a millimeter, so this is really not bad. And I'm quite happy how this turned out. We get a pretty good contact on the taper, and also it's spot on with the runout or with the alignment. Let's get this extension off. And now we only need to drill and tap it with a 10mm thread. Okay, now as we have the geometry of the taper right, we can use the super finishing film to give it a good surface. Yep, be careful. Now as the geometry is fixed, we can use the super finishing film also without the backing, and that will improve the surface finish even more, because the abrasive can more align itself to the surface. So let's do this, give it some oil. And don't run with the abrasive very much over the edge, or you will round it over. And that's pretty nice. Looks good to me. Now we chamfer the end, drill it, tap it with 10mm thread, and flip it around and machine the other side. Okay, power threading M10 thread. Okay, and this is how I finished the Morse Taper 2 saw arbors. I have a Morse Taper 3 to Morse Taper 2 extension in the spindle, and I jammed the Morse Taper 2 into the Morse Taper socket of this extension. A lot of people will ask why I used a extension here, not a sleeve, a short sleeve. It's because I can't reach with the bed slide all the way to the headstock of this machine, because of the spiral of the spring cover of the lead screw. This gives me about that much distance, minimum distance to the headstock, and for that reason I'm using the extension, so I don't have not to reach onto the headstock, and it's rigid enough for light machining that way. Looks a bit awkward, but it's good enough. And I finished these saw arbors just like the other ones I showed in another video series with the straight shank. I drilled them, tapped them, and then I bored them to the diameter of the shoulder bolt. Also, I will not show the machining of the shoulder bolt again, because it's just the same again as in the last series. And this shoulder bolt of course fits in here, and you can also tighten it down with the same wrench as the other. Screws. And the second arbor became a much bigger one. It's for 16mm saw blades and wheel cutters. And I started out with 20mm raw stock, and that was a bit too small in diameter for the 16mm diameter. So I made a sleeve out of the same material, and I Loctited it onto a shoulder that I turned onto the smaller arbor, and then I machined it all over, and that gave me a nice quite a beefy arbor. And it's also low profile, so you can reach down onto a surface and machine along with a wheel cutter. So I think the most interesting thing on these Morse Taper 2 arbors was the actual Morse Taper 2 turning, so I will not show anything else in this video. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. See you next time.